To love learning. To laugh.
To love.
To be loved. To see beauty.
To understand.
To bring grace.
To the things that matter most.
This is Psychology America with Dr. Alexandra. Welcome to my show. For every life stage, we have questions. Let's enhance our lives together as we explore the things that matter most.
Hello, Silja. Welcome to Psychology America with Dr. Alexandra.
Hi, Alexandra. Thank you so much for having me.
And you are in London.
Yes, I'm in London, and it's actually a beautiful summer day.
It's gorgeous here in New Jersey. And a few weeks ago, I remember we were almost going to have this episode we were going to record, and then you were surprised with tickets to a royal horse race at Ascot, where they wear big hats. So we were saying that you were surprised with tickets.
Yeah, exactly. So it was my birthday, and my partner knows that I love to go to Ascot, to the horse races. And it's not so much about the horse races, but it's about the beautiful settings and being able to wear a huge hat. And I'm German, so we don't have these kind of traditions in Germany. It was really fun. I had a huge hat. We had champagne and watched the race.
Fabulous. So you already had the hat, or did you run out and find a hat?
Well, unfortunately, it was last minute, so I actually had to buy one. But you can actually rent hats.
Really?
And
that's a London thing.
That's a London thing, because like you wear a hat maybe once or twice, and the hats are really expensive. So it's smarter to rent a hat than to actually buy one.
Interesting. So for our listeners, you are the founder and CEO of Psych Apps. And you have developed an app called EQ, which is about psychology, and it's designed to enhance the emotional intelligence in the people that play it.
Yeah.
And I originally had thought that the app was for children, but I was wrong. It's an app for adults to develop their emotional intelligence.
Yeah, so when people hear about games, they automatically assume it's for children. And it's a little bit sad and shows our general idea of learning isn't combined with having fun. And so what we're trying to do is the brain loves novelty, it loves being challenged, it loves having fun, right? So why not offer information and learning opportunities in a fun way then? And so that's why we designed the game.
So just so that we can share with listeners about what emotional intelligence is, so we're all familiar with IQ type of intelligence, and EQ or emotional intelligence is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social skills.
Exactly. And it's a bigger predictor for success in relationships and in the work life than actually IQ is. Because everything in the world is about relationships and how you deal with interactions and with stressful emotional situations.
Yes, and stressful would be one scenario. I remember first reading about this in Dan Goleman's book about emotional intelligence. And I want to acknowledge Richard Boyatzis and also Carrie Chernis. But I remember the Bell Labs study that was referenced in Dan Goleman's book, and it was by Robert Kelly and Janet Kaplan. And basically, they were looking at a group of people, and they wanted to see what makes the star performers different than the average performers. And they looked at all kinds of psychological tests, and it wasn't IQ, and it wasn't GPA, and it wasn't all kinds of other things. It was their ability to network.
Wow.
So when they needed to get things done, they just made a quick call to Carol in the other department, who was the admin who, could get this information. And that's what differentiated the star performers.
I can really tell that in the startup world as well. Everything is about connections and who you know and what's the fastest route to resources. And so it's really important to reach out and to connect and to have good relationships with pretty much everyone along the way, even people that you don't think it will help your vision, but maybe at a later time it can come back to you, and it's good to have good connections.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know that in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, he talked about all of our connection. But I remember that there were special people that were
the networkers, right? Or the connection.
They were like the ultra connectors. So we're all connected. There was a study that we're all connected by 6 degrees, but we are connected a lot more to these like super connector people that are connected to a lot of people. It kind of ends up with 1 or 2 in this study.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to ask you about is your journey, Silja, and how you started. Well, now you have a startup company that's a technology company that's creating apps. Yeah. And how did you get to this point?
Well, I was studying psychology. I was finishing my master's, and I really loved research. And I wanted to go and do something more and do my PhD and do more research and add value to the world in a way. And usually in Germany, when you do your PhD, you go to your doctor or your supervisor. We call them doctor father. And you ask for a project, and then he gives you a project, and you work on that for 3 to 6 years, right? And sometimes you end up with a project that you might not be as passionate about. And so I thought, okay, for the first time in history, we have a huge platform where we can reach millions of people. A platform that people are really comfortable with and that they have with them at all times. It's next to them while they sleep. Most of the people take it with them to the loo. It's your smartphone, right? And so
true. That
was my idea to say, okay, that's where we should bring therapy, because it's quite private. It's always accessible and people feel comfortable with it. And I pitched that to my doctor father, and he loved the idea. So we developed the first application. And it was an evidence-based app. We did a proper clinical trial and everything. But people outside of the trial weren't sticking to it long enough to actually reap the benefits. And at first I thought...
So meaning they gave up on it. They would try it, and then they wouldn't continue. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
So what was this one called?
We called it PsychApps E.
PsychApps E. Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of like the working title.
Okay.
And it's still in the App Store, and I'm letting it run dormant for right now, and I might whitelist it to a different company at a later point, because it's too bad to just throw it away. It's a lot of work.
But in other words, you're saying it didn't. This one didn't work.
The first one didn't work. Okay. Exactly.
Okay.
And I went back to the books, and I thought I had made a bad product. But most of the digital mental health products and a lot of the digital health products have a problem with attrition. People drop off. And that's because you need a lot of motivation to actually work on your life, yourself, be it weight or fitness or mental health. And a lot of the applications that are out there, they just take face-to-face therapy and they translate it into the digital. But if you take the face away, the other person, the interpersonal connection, the therapist away from it, a big part of the motivation goes, and you just have more or less an interactive self-help book.
Yes.
And so I thought, okay, how could you actually get people to stick to therapy? And
on a phone. Therapy on a phone.
By themselves. Exactly. And we were at a loss, and then my CTO, my Chief Technical Officer, introduced me to Philip Irwin from Collision Studios. And they're a game development company in the States. They've worked on Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, Barbie, Scrabble. Since 15 years, they've been developing proper games. Mm-hmm. And so they said, okay, why not make a game? Make a completely different tool, a digital therapy. And so that's how EQ came to life. And we are teaching psychological skills. And in a way, therapy is acquiring psychological skills, right?
Yes.
In a fun way, and that you can practice in the game.
And I have played with it.
Yes. And did you enjoy it?
I did enjoy it. And I thought we should share some of it with listeners, if that's okay.
Of course.
And those that may be watching. I have... So basically, I want to find, I wrote it down. You have Jasmine and you have other figures that come across.
Jasmine and Noah.
Yes, and they come across real life scenarios, and then you are faced with the question of what would you do, and then you're given choices, and
Yeah.
and that's after the psychoeducation. Okay, I have one. This is when I think someone hadn't responded to Jasmine.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was in a workplace or what it was, and you're given 3 choices, right? So one choice is, this is driving me crazy. I'm going to watch my favorite show to distract myself. Second option, this is killing me. I'm going to call him 5 times in a row.
That's a little bit obvious, but
yeah. And the third choice is, I hate waiting for him to answer, but maybe he's just busy, so I'll just wait.
Yeah.
What was that one about? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was about action bias. So an action bias is when you have an issue with the tension of waiting, so you jump into an action. And that's not always a good thing, because sometimes you have to wait. In conversations, for example, if you give the other person time to think and process, then you'll probably get a better answer than if you keep on interrupting them and pushing them for information. Or, for example, in a relationship, this was in a relationship. If there are 2 people and one wants more interaction and they push the other partner too much, that might be a deterrent for that other person, right? So you need to give people space and just be able to deal with the pressure and maybe the anxiety and everything that comes up, and reflect upon that and just act thoughtfully.
Yes, I remember now, because it started with the psychoeducation about what is action bias.
Yeah.
And I know that comes up a lot in my private practice. I will give psychoeducation about the pursuer-distancer dynamic within 2 people within a relationship, which I know is talked a lot about in couples, but you have the pursuer who's saying, why don't you call me more? Why don't you text me more? Why don't you give me more attention? And then you have the distancer who feels a little overwhelmed by that, and they just pull back. And then the pursuer jumps up and down more because they notice the pullback. And then the pursuer, it turns to criticism until the distancer completely pulls away. And the solution is that the pursuer, they need to go against their nature, and they need to say less.
Yeah.
Say less, do less, back off a little bit, but it doesn't feel natural. So
Yeah. And one of the things, if you play the game and you make a wrong decision about the action bias, it also explains that action bias often comes from a place of fear, like, for example, attachment theory, that you're fearing you're losing your object of attachment, your partner.
Yes.
And that is a fear that if you give your the space to deal with it, you could actually automatically become less of a pursuer and more relaxed with, being by yourself and giving other people space. So there's an opportunity of growth.
Yes, that's a great point of learning from your app. And I wrote down another one that I thought I should share with listeners, if I can just find it. Oh, yes. A couple of them. So one of them is the expectancy effect that you teach people.
Yeah.
So what is that?
An expectancy effect is when people have a perception of you and an expectation of you, and you kind of adopt that without challenging it. So, for example, people think I'm German, so they think I'm on time, right? And it takes them a while to notice that I'm not. But let's say it was a bad thing. Like, people think I'm always late, and then I think, okay, they assume I'm always late, so maybe that means I'm a late person. I internalize other people's expectations, and then I don't even try to come on time. And that would reflect in other parts of my life, like business, for example, which would be very detrimental to me.
Yes, and I do have a problem with lateness, Silja, and I have internalized it, and I always call it Brazilian time. I'm on Brazilian time because I have a Brazilian mother, but I'd like to work on one of many of my shortcomings. So, Silja, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about how you came to this career in terms of, because I know you were also a model for 17 years. And with a lot of my patients, especially 20-somethings, they can feel a lot of pressure about figuring out what they want to do with the rest of their lives now, right? They're like, I have to figure out what I want to do for my whole life. And I always tell them two things. One is that studies have recently found that the people that are happiest on the job are those that have been doing it the longest.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's news to me too. Cool.
Yeah. So you feel a sense of competency after doing it for a long time. You start to mentor, and it just feels good that you're at ease. You really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But that's not there at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So you have to put time into it, and that varies across professions.
Yeah.
But in addition, I do believe that we learn from every single profession that we enter. We learn something here and then we take it over here. I definitely have experienced that in my own life. And I was wondering what you may have learned from modeling that you're now applying to a technology startup about psychology.
Well, I think two things are the most important. The first thing is the consumer side. If you come from the academic world, and a lot of the products, they're quite sterile and academic and wordy and not as fun because they're coming from the information side and they're not consumer oriented. They're not marketing people. They're not PR people, right? So I have been in this superficial selling beauty, hedonistic life or world for so many years that I know kind of like the fluffy parts of what a product has to have to be appealing for the general population. And that combination of the marketing, the outward focus, and the academic backbones of a product, I think is what makes EQ quite unique and what was fathered or mothered the idea of, having a game. And the second part is dealing with rejection, because in the 17 years, I probably had a casting success of 5 to 10% of all the castings I went to, all the options I was, or all the jobs I was optioned for, I actually got. And at the beginning, you take it very personally and think, okay, something's wrong with me. I'm too tall, I'm too small, I'm too fat, I'm not blonde, I'm not brunette, blah. And then you just kind of say, okay, this has nothing to do with me. They're looking for someone else. And it's about taste. And you can't really discuss or fight about taste. And it's the same thing with me as I go to investor. And some investor says, I love the idea. The other investor says, that's a stupid idea. And then that's their opinion and that's fine. And if they give me some feedback that I have to think about it, I will incorporate it. Otherwise, I'm going to be okay, next investor. And there's going to be someone out there that loves the idea, that believes in me and wants to do something about mental health. So
you're talking about, first of all, you were accepted for 5 to 10%. So that means that you got 90% rejections.
Yeah.
You really learned about sales and optimism. And, I did a study on sales and optimism when I was in grad school. And there's, in my little study, there was absolutely a correlation. And it only makes sense, right? If you're going to be good at sales, you have to be like, okay, let me go to the next one and try again.
Yeah.
I had a one-day job doing telemarketing way back. I must have been 19 years old. And wow, I learned so much that day, just about developing a thick skin to rejection with sales. And I remember they said you should be happy if you get 1 out of 10.
Yeah. It's a numbers game, and it kind of, so in the modeling world, you get praised and complimented up to the heavens, and you get rejected and criticized up down to hell, I guess. And it's not personal. It's just, it doesn't define you. And either you learn that and you go out of the modeling business a better person, or it crumbles your self-worth and you become mentally unwell.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Hopefully
but
not,
I imagine that
not
does
a healthy job.
It may not be at times. Yeah. Your app, I think it looks at extroversion, right?
So each level gives you feedback about your big 5 personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
And so extroversion is one of those traits.
Okay, so share with the listeners what the big 5 are and what it is that you're getting feedback on with your app.
Okay, so the big 5 is one of the very first personality tests that was developed way back when, and is used in clinical settings. And it has 5 dimensions: agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism, openness, and I always forget the 5th one, conscientiousness. Exactly.
Yes.
So, and you're on a sliding spectrum between like extrovert and introvert, and this can change. So it's not stuck for the rest of your life. It's kind of like in the place where you are right now. And it gives you information about, for example, with extroversion, what kind of a job would be good for you, how other people perceive you, and to be able to understand yourself better. So we put questions into the game that ask you about your personality, not preferences, but your personality type.
Proclivities, yeah.
Yeah. And give you feedback at the end with a bit of tips how like to grow and where to challenge yourself and where to push yourself and
yes.
kind of that.
Lovely. When you have done the app for yourself, have you been working on challenging yourself on any of those dimensions, Silja?
Yes, conscientiousness. I'm kind of like a laissez-faire, do it tomorrow, it's going to be fine. But you can't do that if you have a business. Like I have to be super strict with myself, and I have to have really strong guidelines. And I developed a system where I have a checklist, and every day when I remember something to do, I put it on that checklist, and then it gets checked off. So I bet I've changed from the beginning when I started the company to now on the conscientiousness level.
Yes. I worked for a corporation as an intern many years ago, and we developed a measurement to identify who we anticipated would become global leaders for this company.
Oh, wow. And did it work?
And, that's a long-term study, right? To see, like, did the people we chose, did they end up, but what I remember is that we made a decision that conscientiousness and openness to new learning were the 2 most important things that we were looking for to measure in our interviews.
Yeah,
and by openness to learning, we would say, "What's the latest book that you've read, or have you read a book lately?"
Yeah,
and to me, what that means is they're going to continue to learn. They're going to continue to challenge themselves, and if things aren't going well, they're going to say, "How can I make it better?" And they're going to try. I think it's a wonderful trait. Yeah. Openness to learning.
Agreed. Yeah. And it just allows you to perceive the world differently and, never stop being curious and being surprised and delighted by things that you didn't know.
Yes. And that's also overlapping with joy, right?
Yeah.
To me. Yeah. So how is technology currently being used in medical settings for prevention? Are you familiar with what's happening there? Yeah,
so prevention is a big thing, and there are quite a few programs for physical prevention. For example, if you think about this one insurance company called Vitality, if you go to a gym and you have a certain app on your phone, every time you go in, it gives you points because you're working on your physical health, and then you can deduct that from your premium. And so that's a prevention tool. Then there's a tool, it's called Sweatcoin. I don't know, have you ever heard of Sweatcoin?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So it's an application that it counts your steps, and for a certain amount of steps, you get coins, and you can actually buy things from those coins, like headsets or running shoes from Nike or something. It's pretty good. And so they're trying to find a way to get people to actually start working on their eating and their moving and everything to be able to stay healthy. So
I think it's incredible that they give a money reward for exercise and movement. A gift card is money. And
Yeah.
it certainly works when my mother comes. My mother comes to my home every Thursday to
Okay.
visit me and the 4 children. And
Yeah.
if their rooms are 100% clean,
Yeah.
they get a certain amount of money. If they also do their laundry, they
Uh-huh.
get more. And believe
Uh-huh.
me, they scramble. It works.
I bet it's squeaky clean.
Oh my! I mean, I wasn't. I've been so busy that I wasn't working on the laundry thing very well, and I was certainly very, very grateful for her social support and
Yeah.
intervention with the laundry.
By the way, I wanted to say I have so much respect for you. 4 children, and you're now doing the podcast, and you've had this amazing education and everything. I don't know how you did it, but like
Thank
lots
you.
of respect from London here.
Sweet. Thank you, Silja. So what are your next steps with EQ?
At the moment, EQ is subclinical, so it acts preventative, it builds resilience, but it doesn't actually treat mental illness. And I'm raising 1.4 million right now to be able to actually add features that treat low-level depression and anxiety. And so that instead of, starting with meds, you can actually play a game instead. Or when you're waiting for therapy, or you don't have the money, or you live too far away from therapy, that you could do the app and treat low-level
It'll
depression.
still be called EQ? So the anxiety and the depression app will be EQ also?
That is a good question. I think yes, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to be easy accessible for the whole population. That's why we didn't call it a mental health game, but an emotional fitness game. And then 12% of the population and 8% of the 12% of the population is suffering from depression, 8% from anxiety. So that's a big chunk of the population. That also is going to reflect in our players, right? So these players that are in the game will be able to have access to a therapeutic part of the game that helps them with their treatment, and they can still play the normal part of the game. And people who don't need depression or anxiety treatment can play the normal part, the preventative part of the game.
I am personally grateful that you're creating more access to mental health help through this game at a low cost.
Yeah.
And it's different. It's terrific.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's very important. Only 35% of all the people actually get the mental health care they need. And that's like in the UK and the USA, where everybody should be getting health care.
35%, that seems high to me. I think it's much lower than that in the US, yeah.
Okay. That was the data points that I got. But even like 35% is really low for me, and mental health reflects in so many parts of your life. It goes into the physical world as well. Insurance companies say that 41% of all of their insurance claims are mental illness related. Accidents, back pain, sleep problems, headaches, they're all mental illness related.
Oh my goodness. Yes, absolutely. It's so linked. Our mental health is so linked to our physical health. And on Thursdays, I work in a medical clinic doing integrated psychology. And I just want to share with listeners what that is. It's a pretty new branch in our field. And it's when you have psychologists or mental health practitioners right in the medical setting with the medical doctors. And the medical doctors refer the patients on the spot, on the fly, for very brief interventions. Recognizing as a holistic approach that the mental piece of it is so important. So, for example, it could even be a diabetes patient who they're not eating the proper diet, right? They're eating too many carbs, too much sugar, sugary drinks. And that is often a mental situation. It's hard to stop eating. I remember this one Dominican woman, she's like, I just love the sweetbread. My husband brings home the sweetbread, and it's right in front of me, and then I eat it. And so the behavioral health folks are the ones who use something called motivational interviewing. They use questions to try to elicit an inner motivation, or to find out, what's really getting in the way. What is the obstacle here? And that's the mental piece that will absolutely affect the physical side.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I love the idea of that. I read a study that actually people who have had heart attacks and have therapy are much less likely to have a second and a third heart attack than people who don't.
Ah, that makes so much sense. Yes.
It's just, everything is interconnected. You can't just take one part of the body and take care of it. You have to take care of the whole person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you just think about the stress response and the long-term consequences, when we have a serious stress response, or even the mild, low-level, modern-day stress, right? Our back tightens up, and the purpose of that is to attack the tiger, maybe, right? But long-term, you end up with back pain.
Yeah.
And then you have all the blood will rush away from your stomach because digestion isn't important to survive the tiger. But in the long term, you end up with stomach pain. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell that a lot of our lifestyle isn't meant for us. Like, we shouldn't be living like this. If I go into the tube during rush hour, I get anxiety because all these people rushing past me, the enclosed tube system,
Hold
the
on.
heat.
Can you translate for Americans the tube?
Tube. Would that be the subway? The subway.
Yeah, the subway or the metro. Thank you very much.
Metro, exactly,
that was fun.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Yes. And the London metro system is very old, and it's during rush hour, you can barely walk. It's full of people. Everybody's stressed. It's very hot. And there are so many things going on at the same time. So it's like, I try not to travel during these times because I know it's bad for me.
Yeah. It cracks me up how now there's research coming out that nature is good for you. There was a study, where did I read it? It said that taking a walk along the highway versus taking a walk in a trail in the woods, that you feel better in the trail in the woods.
Kind of like we're rediscovering the most sane things ever.
It's true. Yeah. So can we talk about what are the risks of technology?
Yeah.
What are people afraid of with technology? Because you're doing something good, but...
Yeah. I think it's all about everything in balance. It's a little bit like sugar. Sugar itself is not going to hurt you. It's about how much sugar you consume, right? And it's the same thing with the digital. If you use your phone to call people, to text every once in a while, and maybe check your emails, you're going to be fine. But if you're on the phone, studies show that people check their phone over 300 times a day and are on social media up to 6 hours a day, then that's going to have a long-lasting impact on your body and your brain. And a UCL professor said that the digital world is actually like digital cocaine. It has the same effect on the brain, and it actually changes the way your brain functions and the neural pathways in your brain. I think that we have created something and don't have really the natural ways to process it yet. So we're going to have to find a way to kind of limit ourselves to be able to deal with it without getting sick as a people.
Yes. So you're just talking about moderation.
Yeah, I'm talking about moderation. I mean, there are a lot of things. Like, you can see young girls, their self-harm went up by like 28% in the last 5 years. Young boys and porn addiction has gone through the roof. Suicides.
Porn addiction is as strong as cocaine.
Yeah, and I would almost go and say worse, because it hinders young men and women from having intimate, healthy relationships for the rest of their lives. And it's not just about sex, it's about like being able to connect with another person. And so the people who are properly porn addicted from a young age, the entry age is 11 years old, they stay lonely and mentally stinted for relationships for the rest of their life, or they have to go through a rebooting program that can take years and is really hard.
Where is there such a rebooting program for porn addiction?
It's called NoFap, And it was developed by a guy who actually was porn addicted himself many years ago on Reddit, and now it has a proper website and everything. And it's about like not masturbating and not looking at porn up to a year. It can take like 3 or 4 months to kind of like reboot the brain. But if you've been using porn since you were 11 and you're 28 now, it's going to take years. And it's a whole community of men who support each other and help each other and share their stories and everything.
Yes. And are you familiar with how technology is being used for facial recognition?
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the things where I like to quote Jurassic Park. Like, they were so excited that they could do it that they didn't ask themselves if they should do it. And a big ethical question. So artificial intelligence, facial recognition, voice recognition, all these things can be very helpful. It's a question, what are you doing with it and who owns the data? There is this one app that can deduct from a profile photo if you're homosexual or not. And it's not a problem in the US or the UK unless you don't want to be outed. But there are countries where you can be punished.
I wonder if you're referring to the research that was done by a Stanford professor, some initial research where they looked at 300,000 photos of images of gay people from dating websites. They whittled it down, and they said that their study was able to identify who was gay and who wasn't by 81% for men. There was a lot of controversy around that because of the risk of false positives, meaning a small percentage of them would be identified as being gay based on their image when they were not, and all the risks and implications of that.
Yeah. I don't see how that could be useful for anyone to know. Like, it's none of anybody's business.
Right.
But, it's science, so it's interesting that one can do that. I mean, theoretically, there's another study by Yale that they could see with an artificial intelligence algorithm on Instagram who was depressed and who wasn't by the filters that they used, how many people were on the pictures, the amount of likes and things like that, up to the point where they could predict that someone was going to develop a depression in the next few weeks or months.
Wow.
Yeah, and the question is, what do you do with that information? Like, should you go and reach out to someone and say, hey, you might be suffering from a depression if they didn't ask for it? Who allows you to know about that? How can that data be like protected? And there's a lot of implications that are quite dangerous, if you ask me.
Unfortunately, okay, we're good. For a second there, we had a weak connection on Skype, but we're okay now. Yes, you're right. Those are questions as far as what do you do with it. Yeah. Those are ethical questions. Yeah. And there's a company in Israel that said that they were able to identify terrorist proclivities through facial recognition. Yeah. I heard about that. Yeah. I don't know if you had heard about that one.
I haven't heard about that, but I would be surprised if people wouldn't be working on that.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I have studied some of Ekman's work on microexpressions, and that's what initially got you interested in psychology, right? Was it that, or? Go ahead.
No, that was one of the things that was one of my highlights before I started studying, but it wasn't the initial. So my initial move to psychology was when I was 12. My sister, for her birthday, got a book about body language.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay. But I love Ekman's studies. I think it's extremely interesting. I love the show that came out of that called True Lies. I don't know if you've watched it.
I haven't watched the show.
It's quite entertaining, and it has a lot of truth and tidbits in it that are very interesting, so you might enjoy it.
I know that I took one of his courses. It was an online course on micro-expressions. And just for listeners, macro-expressions are the emotions. So humans have basic emotions that are universal. And it's been studied across the world, across different labs, that We all have the same general emotions. And macro emotions are the emotions that take your whole face, and it could take from half a second to 4 seconds. And it's pretty obvious. Okay, this one feels sad. This one feels disgust. This one feels joy. But micro expressions and also subtle expressions are much faster, and they can happen in less than half a second, and they can be the real emotion that we try to suppress before. We do try to suppress emotions at times, right?
Yeah, often.
So I remember that he taught that, it's definitely anger if the jaw is thrusting forward.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have like pursed lips, it could be slight anger, it could be suppressed anger, but it could also be intent thought.
Oh,
just deeply thinking.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's so interesting.
It is so interesting. The other thing about emotional intelligence, back to your app, what I remember really learning from my initial studies in this topic was trusting my gut, or trusting that my whole brain has a lot of wisdom.
Yes.
And allowing myself to access the whole brain when making decisions.
Yeah. The so-called gut feeling, right?
Yeah, that people will call it gut feeling, or they'll call it intuition. But emotions are very linked to our ability to make decisions. And a cornerstone of emotional intelligence is self-awareness.
Yeah.
So can you listen to yourself in order to make a good decision? So Antonio Damasio, he studied a guy who had a brain tumor, and his name was Elliot, and he was an attorney. And the brain tumor actually cut off the space between the amygdala, that holds our emotions in our brain, and the prefrontal cortex, which is where the thinking part of our brain is. And so there was no communication there between the emotions and the thinking part.
Yeah.
And as a result, this guy could make, he could really analyze things forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
He could not make a decision.
Wow.
And that's because in the end, we assign values through emotion to how we make decisions, and he couldn't do that anymore. So he could analyze.
Yeah. I think it's really important to have access to understanding yourself and tools to be able to know why you're feeling the way you are, what is the underlying emotion, and where it's coming from, and how to deal with that. Because then you become less of just someone who reacts, and you become starting to act and make decisions that are good for you, and not come from a place of fear or anger that is uncontrolled and unreflected by yourself.
Yeah, your app is definitely giving psychoeducation to get people to think more clearly about decisions. What would you like to share with listeners about how they can find you or learn more about the EQ app?
Yeah, so EQ is going live very soon in Canada, the USA, and the UK, probably next week. And you can just go to the site by www.eqoogame.com and download the game from there. Or you can just look for it in the app stores. It's on Android and iTunes, and even on Amazon. And, just give it a try. You learn lots of fun things. And I think, especially if you're a listener of this podcast, you're interested in psychology, you're interested in personal development. And so this is a fun way to do it, and to go out into the real world and then practice the new skills that you've learned while having fun.
Yes, I do encourage the listeners to try it. It's great. And it is for adults. And I think you found out that it was mostly men in your...
Yeah.
Even
So
though it was,
originally,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, originally we had built it for between 18 and 28 because
Yes.
those are, so to speak, now the digital natives, and because that's when a lot of the mental illnesses manifest. And we thought, okay, this is a good point to, put out prevention and to help people. But from our beta, we have about 4,000 beta testers in Australia and New Zealand. About 65 to 70% of those are men, 35 plus. And so this was a bit of a surprise to us, and it might be because it's a game and men do more gaming than women at this point. It could have many other reasons, maybe also because it's private and men are less likely to reach out to another person about mental health issue. But I'm happy that we're reaching a population that is generally quite difficult to reach with mental health awareness and mental health treatment. So that's actually good news.
That's great. And you're also doing some collaboration with insurance companies now. Right?
Yeah, we're working on that because insurance companies, of course, have to make sure that everything is evidence-based. And so we put in application forms now to ethics committees so that we can do proper trials with the application to say, okay, this is empirically based, but it's not evidence-based yet because we haven't tested it. So we're working on testing it.
Excellent. So Silja, thank you so much for coming on Psychology America.
Thank you for having me. This was a great talk. And,
great to chat with you.
Yeah, great. And I'll be listening to you in the future and looking forward to further podcasts from you.
We will be in touch. Thank you. Bye, Silja.
Thank you. Bye-bye.